Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Turok and are continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and it's been 48 hours, so you know Robert or FPGA Zoomspas has improved the TLB implementation, and there's a bunch of new games that are playing, and some games that are kind of playing that you're going to be very interested in watching. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But right now, GoldenEye will be marked as no boot on the Excel sheet that we keep track of is what games work and don't. But you can technically actually get it to boot into the attract screen sometimes. And if you rush through things with a certain ROM, you can actually get in-game until it freezes. Big thanks to Andy D for helping with this capture, along with Insane Friend. I've had a very busy holiday season, but I snuck off into my office to get this voiceover done for you guys on Saturday. But just seeing GoldenEye execute any code on the Nintendo 64 core is absolutely wildly impressive. On the North American version, once you get to the menu screen and you try to start, sometimes you might see something, other times you may freeze, but you'll see here on Insane Friend's capture, if you rush through the Japanese version, you can in fact get into the game. Now this is not quote-unquote playable right now, it's definitely going to freeze on you. You're definitely not going to be able to enjoy GoldenEye from start to finish, but this is new implementation of TLB that is bringing us games like GoldenEye right now, and there are other games that we just got that are 100% playable that we'll get to shortly. But this is GoldenEye running on the current N64 FPGA core, and it's only going to get better from here, but it's definitely going to take some time. Robert said maybe a week or two until he's able to update this again with new code. You'll see the minute you go into that room, it is just a freeze. But you can also get some multiplayer going as well. It'll freeze at certain points in time, but just seeing GoldenEye execute code on the core is nothing short of incredible. The first time that this core played any game, everyone started asking GoldenEye when. Well, technically it happened yesterday. I'm sure this isn't considered a real great implementation, but it is working, so we can now say that GoldenEye, at least in part, does work on the current core, but trust me, it's definitely going to freeze, so I wouldn't spend a ton of time with it. But you can get into the menu, you can navigate around, you can read some of the mission briefings. It is the first sign of life for one of Nintendo 64's most popular games, and I can't wait to see what the next core brings as far as improvements are concerned. Now moving over to a game that is now playable on the current core without any hacks whatsoever, it's going to be Perfect Dark. You could get into the game and you could enjoy it previously with some patched versions of the game. Now you can just boot up that straight cartridge port and go from here. And as we see the intro draw in with all of the different VI effects turned on, this is just exactly how you remember it looking on your television screen, except now we have crystal clear HDMI out without the need to modify original Nintendo 64 hardware, which is one of the best benefits of the core. Obviously Nintendo 64 hardware, it's common, but it is expensive, so you can definitely get real hardware and play on your televisions. It's the HDMI modding or RGB modding to get that clear signal out if you want to use a flat panel that can be very difficult and prohibitively expensive. So being able to see the intro to Perfect Dark here running on the core, getting that clear HDMI out is such a big benefit. If you've never seen this footage in HDMI before, you've probably never seen Perfect Dark be this clear. And big thanks to Terminator 2K2 and Pixel Cherry Ninja for this footage. This is a very collaborative effort today because, like I said, I've been extremely busy, so much so that I have another turkey in the oven right now for a Saturday Thanksgiving as well, and I snuck out here to get some stuff done. And if you're wondering, it's going to be a Cajun turkey inspired by Popeye's chicken. Not relevant to the video, but everyone does love some Popeyes. But you'll see here in Perfect Dark, again, it's just so much fun to watch this even work in and of itself. This is one of the hardest games as far as putting stress on the Nintendo 64 is concerned. It barely seemed to function on real hardware, and it's functioning the exact same here, which isn't a knock at the core whatsoever. It's just, remember, if you think the frame rate's slow sometimes, you have to go back and check real hardware, because a lot of times you'll realize that it was just the Nintendo 64 running at a very slow frame rate. But even on the top of the tower here in the first level, seeing this run on the core without any sort of trickery or patching it all, it's just so much fun, and I can't wait to get another playthrough of Perfect Dark in with my Brawler 64 controller, which I love so much better as far as the ergonomics are concerned. Moving over another game that has been promoted to working, it's going to be Mario Tennis. This is an absolutely spectacular game. It is as much fun as Mario Golf, especially if you have a second player involved. And again, it's another game that didn't used to work outside of these most recent core updates, and now you can see from the graphics to the speed to everything else, this just looks, sounds, and feels like Mario Tennis. And when I say sound, of course you're going to be getting yourself a sound sample, so enjoy it for like 45 seconds or so, but don't go anywhere because I got more games that started to work to show you. Enjoy! sounds correct in my ear, and when I say this is one of the most fun multiplayer games on the Nintendo 64, I absolutely mean it. If you get a game night going, you get a couple of friends, have some drinks, you're going to start screaming at your television, just having fun the entire time, and you can now do that on MiSTer FPGA. And it's great that these TLB games are now working. We've gotten Mario Golf and Mario Tennis this week alone, and those are two of the games that I played more than any other game with friends back in the day. This is definitely the type of thing I'll probably sit down with my wife and get a couple matches of Mario Tennis in. I'm sure she'll win, and then she'll crap talk me the entire night. She is a very sore winner, folks, but I always lose. It just seems to be how it goes. But let's move on to another game that didn't work outside of the most recent core, and one that everyone has been asking about. I'm sure you could guess that's going to be Turok 3. This game definitely has some weird controls that you do need to pivot around in the game, but that has nothing to do with the core. It is all to do with how Turok actually plays, but as far as the performance is concerned, it is quite good, as is the music. One more quick sample, and I'll be right back. Turok 3 always had really good music, but again, the control scheme is just something that I always struggle with when I play this game, and it's definitely something you want to adjust in the options menu. Now, there is still improvement gains to be made with TLB, and TLB is definitely not done. There's a lot of bug fixing going on, and some of the data caching and overall speeds with TLB implementation are going to vary from game to game, and there's definitely still games that utilize TLB that will not boot whatsoever on the current core. So just be aware that what you're seeing here is still work in progress. This is not the final iteration of it. These are just the games that came alive and you were able to start playing once Robert released that core yesterday. I'm doing this voiceover on Saturday. He released it Friday around like noon or so. But all of the Turok games are now playable on the current core, and you can start enjoying them. I do not know, maybe later on in the game you're going to see some freezing issues. I don't think anyone has completed this as of yet, but if you want to start testing it, you totally can. And these are some of the most beloved games on the Nintendo 64. I played them all back in the day, but the original is still my favorite Turok. I just love that outdoor sort of nature setting where something like Turok 3 here takes place in all sorts of different environments. But it is again just so much fun to see these games come alive, especially the introductory sequence in Turok 3. That is just absolute nightmare fuel right there. It is something you're never going to forget. I remember the first time I saw that, when it popped up again, I remembered it all over. Now I know everyone's going to ask, no, Conker does not work, except it technically does work for a couple of seconds. You're going to see here the introductory sequence. There is Conker, and he's completely missing his lower jaw. His mouth is just floating in air. Some of his tail is completely missing, but this is running on the current core, and you can start to see life in Conker, and I didn't want to keep that out of the video, even though I only usually show you guys stuff that is playable. You'll see here, once this introductory cut sequence starts to play, it is going to freeze here on Andy D's capture. He didn't get inside of the door, but if we move over to Insane Friend, who sent me this footage over, he was able to get into the door. It seems to be that only the PAL ROM right now is going to show any signs of life. It's definitely not running at full speed if you can't tell, and that's just because the TLB implementation is not done, and it is going to freeze, but you can start seeing signs of life in Conker, and I definitely didn't want to not tell you guys about that. Now, another game that is promoted to working and everyone has been asking about tests on is going to be Shadowman, and I'm actually relatively surprised by that because I remember playing this back in the day on multiple different systems, and while I think it is totally a fun game, it's not one of those games that I initially think of when I think of Nintendo 64. But tell me down below, when you think of this console, what's the first game that you want to play if you haven't played in a while? I would definitely say for me it's going to be Bomberman Hero, because it always is. But there seems to be a lot of fun out there for Shadowman as well. But again, it's another game that was not working outside of the most recent core update, and that is just again amazing to see. We're basically like 93 to 94% of the North American library playable, and we're down to maybe only like 8 or 9 TLB implemented games that don't currently boot on the core. But the closer this gets to the finish line, the longer it will probably take, because it's that last bit of work, the bug fixing, implementing the last little bits of code, that seem to take the longest in any core development cycle. So just be aware, even if we're getting really close to the end might not be for 3 or 4 months from now. We'll just have to wait to see what Robert does, but he's definitely at least surpassed that goal of 1 game by Christmas. And the joke on Discord now is maybe every game but one will be playable on Christmas, and he just did it in reverse. But if you've been waiting to see Shadowman, you can play it on the core today, and I do love that they have Rottweilers in here that just bark at you. It's a little fun touch. Unfortunately, there is not a pet button. Well, this game has a lot of voice samples as well that were definitely crushed down a lot for the Nintendo 64, but I'm going to give you a sound sample to see how they're sounding coming out of the core and how crushed they really are. Enjoy!
Hey there, Mike. Glad you could make it.
How could I refuse your offer? How could I ever refuse you, Agneta?
You can't. I'm simply irresistible. I hope you read the file I gave you, and read it real well. Between the lines, you'll find the signs.
You got my stuff?
Come on in, honey.
You know, on the way over here, I got to thinking about these dark souls. If they're so damn dangerous, why didn't the ancients just destroy them?
Because that's impossible.
I mean, obviously the audio quality there is abysmal, but that is because that's what it would be like on real hardware as well. The Nintendo 64 having cartridges, not compact discs, just meant that you had to basically crush down all of those audio samples to make sure they fit on a cart. Now, another game that started working, I told you all the Turok games are here. Well, Turok 2 is here as well, and I love the blasting iguana that comes out at the beginning of the introductory sequence. It is so much fun. Now, this definitely isn't running the fastest, and you can kind of play around with different settings and RAM expansions to get better or worse frame rates out of something like Turok. And do remember that you definitely want to play around with the control options if you're having difficulty, because this game is definitely one where I feel like the default control, it just breaks my brain when I actually try to navigate around the world. And Andy D did this capture, and it seems like he was struggling with the same thing. That is definitely just Turok in a nutshell. And a lot of these games, they hadn't really figured out how to have first-person shooters work perfectly on a console yet, so there's definitely some growing pains, especially if you haven't played them in a while. But all of the lighting effects, all of the gameplay is here. It does seem like it might be slightly slower than real hardware, but we're still not at the point yet where we're going to be doing side-by-side comparisons because the core is not done. And those of you that have been asking for those comparisons, I don't usually run them until the developer, in this instance Robert, says that the core is basically done. That way I know I'm comparing MiSTer against the real hardware in the best possible light. So that'll come eventually, and don't forget, I always do them. But again, Turok 2 was a game that was not working outside of yesterday's core update, and it's just kind of funny. For TLB, not that many games used it, but some of the games that people remember the most fondly utilize it a lot, and it's not like it really does anything to make the game more impressive. It's just a different memory management system, but there's so many games in TLB that people had back in the day. People are just so excited for it to be here. But if you've never played Turok 2 before, I would definitely say start with the original Turok, understand the story and where the franchise came from, and then go to Turok 2 and 3, because the original game has completely different vibes than these two, and I do still think the original Turok has the best vibe in the franchise. But it's just another game that works. It's so much fun to see the real-time lighting here, and the Nintendo 64 output this with such good quality graphics, and that's why MiSTer FPGA is so awesome. And definitely if you want to play on analog, you can get that RGB out and it's going to look clear as well. Now, another game that started working is South Park, and I remember wanting this game so badly back in the day. I got it for Christmas and I could not be more excited to open it and go and play it. Unfortunately, when I actually sat down to play it, my child brain broke because all of that anticipation and excitement ended up being what I would consider a B- tier first-person shooter on the Nintendo 64. Everyone loved South Park the show back in the day, and when we found out that it was getting a game on Nintendo 64, everyone really wanted to check it out. And I'm not saying that this game isn't good in its own right, I'm just saying that it definitely let us down compared to what we were expecting it to be. But it is a perfect game to show you right after Thanksgiving, because the first level has you fighting these mutant turkeys that were brought alive by a comet, and it's just such a good Thanksgiving vibe going on here. It definitely has a good sense of humor, and it does a good job graphically of kind of relaying that art style of what South Park was in 3D on Nintendo 64. It's just unfortunate that gameplay doesn't really 100% keep up with what you would expect it to do. There's so many better first-person shooters on Nintendo 64. This isn't the one that I would go to first, but it is another game that didn't work outside of yesterday, and that is super exciting. But I'm going to give you one more sound sample so you can get some South Park music in there, and I'll be right back with one more game to close out the video. Definitely doesn't sound like something that would have been in South Park the television show unless it was in there and I've forgotten about it, but it does sound good on the current core. And I was slightly lying to you, I don't have another game to show. I was going to show you Rakuga Kids, but I want to get a little bit more of a capture of that. Just be aware that that is working as well, and I'll definitely show that to you next video. But if you have any testing requests, leave them down below and I'll throw them in the back of Chef's Hatchback and we'll bring them to you next time. But TLB is here and we keep getting updates. There's definitely still some games that don't work, and there's some games that work only with a gigantic asterisk next to them like GoldenEye and Conker. But TLB is here and I can't wait to see what the next core update brings. A big thanks to Pixel Cherry Ninja for helping out a little bit with this video. I don't care what people say about him, I think he's alright and pretty helpful. I just make fun of him because that's what we do, folks. But when the next core update comes, I'll definitely do another video, and if you have any testing requests for the next one, leave them down below and I'll try to check them out. But I gotta get this turkey done, so we're done here. Bye bye.